So hello everybody, welcome back to my series on the large King Crimson box sets. If you've missed the first couple videos, I would suggest going and checking those out, but I am giving a brief overview with a suggested purchase order for King Crimson fans with limited money who are either looking for the best places to start with the box sets or the best sequence to buy them in to get the most out of your money. This is the third and I believe final video, should wrap up the set. As always, I'm Hans from Electric Brain Electric Shadow. We are a contemporary art rock project which balances thematic and musical complexity with emotional nuance and accessibility. Be sure to check out Electric Brain Electric Shadow on Bandcamp or your preferred streaming platform, or you can find album playlists for, in my opinion, our two best works right here on YouTube. So we're in the back half of the sequence now, and where the first four that I listed were immensely enjoyable on their own terms, these last four, I think, start to get into areas that are either maybe a little bit more of scholarly interest, right? A little bit more challenging to appreciate, and things which are somewhat more of historical value than they are for, listening for just the sake of it. There's also a little bit of repetition here where, if you have bought the four sets that I proposed so far, some of what's here might start to feel a little bit repetitive or, a little bit exhausting. And in a couple cases, part of the reason that they're relatively low is because of some sense of repetition with the other sets, if not full duplication. So the fifth set that I have recommended in the purchase order here is the complete Larks Tongues in Aspic. And the thing to be aware of with this set is that sound quality is a barrier to appreciation here in a way that I didn't really find it to be in any of the other sets, right? I can grab any random show from Starless or Road to Red, throw it on, and really just have a blast, right? And with this set, a lot of the time the recording quality is poor enough that it starts to impose a barrier for someone who's not more of a serious and dedicated bootleg listener, or someone who's not really interested in learning about as much as can be gleaned on the Jamie Moore era, even, those parts which are maybe more a matter of study than joy. And also, maybe this is a sacrilege, but I do think that the shows themselves, sound quality aside, I think the quality of the performance and material actually kind of got better during the Starless era. Moore was, of course, very influential on Bruford's drumming and percussion style as it took shape over the next few years. He was very key to Fripp's conception of this band, but, he was as much of a visual presence, as much of a character in person as he was a creator of sound. And so with these audio documents, you're only getting part of the fun, you're only getting part of the idea of what was happening in a way that I don't know is really true of any other King Crimson era. So as a collection of gigs, frankly, this set is maybe less compelling to a relatively casual listener than any of the boxes that I've listed before this, in spite of the uniqueness and historical significance of the material. Now, there is some great stuff here in that regard. There's a live in studio DVD of the Moore lineup where you do get that visual sense of what he did in a live context. It's kind of short, there's not that much of it, but the little bit that you do have is really, really engaging. And the studio material is pretty interesting as well. There's a collection of live fragments interposed with studio chatter. There's an album of alternate takes and mixes, both of which have the quality of adding some amount of unfamiliarity to the Larks album, which by this point probably everybody has heard many, many times. Now, there's a sense that you get from reading Fripp's comments in the booklet to this box, which is one of the more interesting booklets. There's a sense that you get that the whole kind of story of this mid-70s period was an adaptation to the loss of Moore, right? A gradual kind of restructuring relative to that loss and the way that loss unbalanced the band. And the interesting thing is that the band and the material got better and better during that process of simplifying and streamlining, even though the feeling that the players might have had was one of struggling with that streamlining process. So this particular set is a document of a period that's historically significant, but doesn't necessarily offer the same pleasure in consumption for the listener that a lot of the other boxes do. This is one of the cheaper sets just because there's less here than some of the others and it only focuses on a single album. But even in spite of that, I would make it one of your later purchases. And, if you're on a budget, you can buy the 40th anniversary edition of Larks. You can watch at least some of that live performance on YouTube. You can get much of the most compelling bits of this box for about a quarter of the financial outlay. So the next set I have in the sequence at number 6 of the 8 is Complete Thrak. And, one of the challenges in putting this set together for me, and one of the challenges I had in appreciating these boxes when I kind of bought them in a string back in 2018, was avoiding the syndrome of having too much blue back to back, right? Since, like I've mentioned, 3 of these 8 boxes cover his era, and if you do buy all those 3, there really are songs that start to pile up. And between those 3 Blue era boxes, if my house burned down, this is the last one that I would replace. The live material is maybe the least revelatory of those 3. The On and Off the Road era, they had a kind of just youthful energy and core of perfect intensity that they don't quite have here. Heaven and Earth has the benefit of a later technology and a bit more intense sound. Here you get the double trio format that does add some distinction, that does some interest, but not necessarily enough to keep you from being aware that by the time you get to the end of all 3 boxes, you've heard a lot of, in some cases, not drastically different versions of One Time or Dinosaur or Matek Hudasai, songs which, as wonderful as they are, don't necessarily bear up to many, many live listenings in the same way that something like Easy Money did. Now, that's not to say that there's not some interesting material here. There's a kind of reconfigured version of the Thrak Attack disc called Attack a Thrak that is a pretty compelling set of some of the noisiest improv from this era. I also really like the disc called Jurassic Thrak, which is kind of an imagined hour in the studio with bits of stray chatter and instrumental fragments. They've included versions of that concept in most of the boxes, and the one here really kind of feels more like hanging out with the band than some of the others. It's a pleasurable experience, and, one thing to look forward to if you do pick this box up. Now, Live King Crimson is always great, of course, and there are some pretty good full dates on here, which do present the Thrak era material in a little bit more of an energetic context. Personally, my own favorite show from the Thrak era is the DGM release Live in London, which I found browsing used CDs in a store, and which actually I enjoyed so much that it led me to start looking into other DGM releases, other King Crimson Collectors Club material. That, in turn, really kind of spurred my interest in these box sets. Now, the Live in London show, I believe, is not on this set, and it's actually kind of louder and fiercer than any of the shows which are. So, If you're on a budget with these sets, I would make this one of your lower priorities. And if you want a good representation of the Thrak era live, I'm personally, like I mentioned, very keen on Live in London, which can be picked up for much less than the cost of this larger box. Number 7 in the sequence is Road to Red. And like I mentioned a few times, the reason that I've put this so far down is really to give yourself some time to recharge, cleanse your palate after Starless. Judged sheerly on the basis of content, this is probably as good really as any music in the world. But, the Starless box is such a great trove of this era that for me, listening to this, and listening to Starless in sequence, it's probably going to be a lot for even the most devoted fan. And it might be hard to avoid the feeling of too much of a good thing, unless you string them out a bit, as I've suggested doing here. Frankly, I bought this set shortly after I finished working through the Starless box. By the time I was done with this set, I felt kind of gorged. I was ready to be done. If you can avoid giving yourself that feeling, I'd recommend doing so. And like I've mentioned before, while the album Red is obviously classic at a level which defies words, there's a bit more variety and spontaneity in the live stuff from Starless. But with the Larks box, you can hear them finding themselves in this era. With this box, Road to Red, you can hear them having definitively found themselves and maybe starting to lose themselves a tiny bit. With Starless, you can hear them right at that perfect moment between the two. Now, if you've already digested Starless and you can't wait for more of the Wet and Bruford era, I'd say definitely buy this whenever you have the funds, even if that means pulling it ahead of a few things in line, right? And I certainly do think that there's much more to be found here in terms of enjoyment than the complete Thrak or complete Larks Tongues boxes. I can imagine opting out of the complete Thrak and complete Larks Tongues boxes and still eventually wanting to get this one. I do have one minor gripe here, which is I was disappointed to find no extra studio material for the album Red beyond a couple of trio versions, which are basically just reduced mixes, right? There aren't any alternate takes, there's no studio chatter, and there's no mention in the booklet of why those things might be absent. Now, they also did not include those things in Starless, but that omission felt more reasonable because so much of that album was generated either from live improv or was actually a live recording of a composed track. Here, on Red, there are 3 songs that weren't played live at all prior to the album sessions. And so it seems like there might be more potential here for either interesting or illuminating studio material relative to that album. Why that omission was made, I don't know, but it's a minor gripe that I wanted to get off my chest.
I'm being quite ruthless about this, so everyone else be too.
And the last thing that I have in my suggested order is the complete 1969 box, which covers an era which is arguably the most essential of all the eras, the most vital and magical of all the eras. And there's a paradox that happens where, because it's so essential, they've put everything in that they possibly could, which makes the set itself actually maybe less enjoyable and essential than the era. Now, the live material here is, of course, frequently astonishing, but the best of it is included in Epitaph. And I'll just jump ahead a bit to budget alternatives and say that if you can't afford this whole set, then most of what's really enjoyable about it you can probably get if you just pick up the 40th anniversary version of Court of the Crimson King and a copy of Epitaph, which can be had fairly affordably. The main draw to this, the main unique thing about it, is the full sessions. And there really haven't been session discs in any of the other sets. If you're somebody who finds sessions interesting, then that's fantastic. More power to you. But, I don't spend a lot of time listening to sessions. And, I made every effort to string them out, to not do them all in one sitting, to look for things to be interested in. Ultimately, there was really no way I could get through all the session discs without having it feel a little bit like a chore, right? And it also had the consequence of I don't want to hear that finished album for like a year now. Now, that being said, there were things that were interesting about listening through the session discs. I don't know if I'd ever totally understood how, as fantastic as some of the playing on Court of the Crimson King is, a lot of it is actually somewhat more straightforward and simple in its arrangement than a lot of other classic prog rock, right? Particularly stuff like the songs Epitaph, I Talk to the Wind. Uh, you know, I wonder if part of the enduring popularity of the album has to do with it actually being somewhat more straightforward, at least in parts, right? Obviously, 21st Century Schizoid Man is the playing on that is stellar, right? But I don't know that I totally appreciated the relative simplicity of much of the rest of this album until I listened to them putting it together layer by layer in the sessions. There are also some interesting historical things that you can hear in the sessions. This box includes material from the aborted sessions with Tony Clark. And Fripp talks in the booklet about how Clark had him sitting up all night strumming acoustic chords like a Moody Blues song. And sure enough, you listen to the sessions and you can actually hear versions of I Talk to the Wind that are based on Moody Blues-ish acoustic strumming. So there's some historical interest there. There's kind of a snapshot into the time, an x-ray of the time, which is fairly interesting. You can also hear in the sessions how Fripp kind of took a director's role even very early in the process and the life of the band, right? At one point, he says, I can do it better. I think we all can. I think the feel was there, but we could have been a bit more precise. Then immediately he flubs the next take, right? So you can kind of get a feeling not just of his personality at the earliest phase of the band, but also that phenomenon that happens when you do something over and over and stress begins to make you worse through repetition, not better. So times like that, I do understand the appeal of session compilations, right? The way they reveal bits about the story of the mood and the characters and the kind of arduous journey of making that album. Plus, you get to hear Fripp tell Ian MacDonald that he has the nicest ass in showbiz. Still, that doesn't change the fact that if you're not a scholar or an archivist or a completist, then of all the box sets, this might be the least urgent in terms of finding the money to purchase it, especially, again, if you can get a copy of Epitaph or the 40th anniversary edition of Court. So just to kind of sum up my own perspective on the value of these different boxes and kind of the level of joy to be had from each, at this point, I think I've gushed enough about Starless. On and Off the Road, Sailor's Tales, Heaven and Earth. Those are a lot of money, but you get a lot of great material. They're definitely worth it if you can make the outlay for them without cramping your lifestyle. Road to Red is wonderful, but similar enough to Starless that you might want to wait a bit, put some space between them before you pick it up. And basically, any box with complete in the title, complete Larks, complete Thrak, complete 69, has some material that is of interest and a certain amount that's wonderful, but you might be able to get the best stuff elsewhere for cheaper, and a lot of it is more of interest to scholars, archivists, right? Probably something you can forgo if you are strapped for cash and just more interested in hearing great music. All right. Well, thank you much, everybody, for your time and attention, as always. Hope you have a good week. I always appreciate likes, comments, and subscribes. Even negative comments are good for boosting things in the algorithm. And please check out Electric Brain, Electric Shadow on Bandcamp or your preferred streaming platform.